When I was younger, I did what I think a lot of people do. I looked to my heroes to define who I was going to be, or at least who I was going to tell others I was going to be. And when I was 16, I wanted to be a 60s rock star. I remember one day, I went to a thrift store and I got a Nehru jacket. Think the album cover of Sgt. Pepper's. Only my jacket was paisley. And it swirled with pink and gold and purple and black. It was incredible. And just like any teenager, I couldn't wait to wear my new jacket. I remember it was right around Easter, and I decided to debut my new look at an Easter egg hunt that I was going to with my little brother. I stood by the sidelines filled with pride, just knowing that everyone would know that I was a 16-year-old rock god. And just like my heroes, I would change the world. I remember just standing there, taking it all in, when a woman walked up to me, put her arm around, and said, "I'm so proud of you. You dress like an Easter egg for the little kids. You're such a good boy." It was a really tough moment for my teenage pride. But at the same time, it was an incredible moment in my life because it was the first time I began to think about context, culture, and a shared vision. Context was the first thing that I learned from my Easter egg jacket moment. The idea that things have to be relevant in order to be believable. I hadn't created any relevance for my jacket. I hadn't written songs that would change a generation. I hadn't played amazing guitar. I had simply purchased something and put it on. This idea reemerged recently when I decided to move across the United States. After 15 years of working in creative agencies in Portland, Oregon, my wife and I packed up a truck and drove to Central Florida. Along the way, we stopped in a number of cities. And in each city, I heard a very similar statement. Our community is growing. We're going to be the next somewhere else. And not only were they planning on being somewhere else, but the value of that other place were the things in it, the buildings, the social activities, sustainability initiatives, walkability. The idea that these solutions were not being designed for the people who lived in the community, but for other people in other places at other times, amazed me as a designer. When I arrived in my new home on the Space Coast in Florida, about an hour east of Orlando, I began to hear the same kinds of stories. You're so lucky to be here. It's the perfect time. Our community is growing, and we're going to be the next somewhere else. I also heard about initiatives to build new things in the area, innovation centers, maker spaces, even better bars. The difference between the stories that I heard on the Space Coast and all the other cities were only that I had time to ask for context. I began to learn that 15.5% of the people on the Space Coast work in the high-tech industry. That makes it the 5th largest tech center in the United States, a fact that not many people know, even on the Space Coast. I also learned that people in this community have invented and created and built amazing things, rockets that took a man to the moon and back, all the way to critical components on smartphones that we use every day. But the area also has a challenge. In some companies, as much as 70% of new employees leave within the first 3 years. And that fact costs the community tens of millions of dollars every year. Not just for the companies who are bringing in new employees and training them, but for the government and community itself as they try to build new initiatives in order to retain people and make the area more desirable. As a designer, I believe that we need to understand these journeys. And so I began to ask people what their experience was like coming to the Space Coast. And one story was incredibly meaningful to me. It was the story of my friend Pawan. Pawan's Indian. He's an engineer and an innovator. And Pawan dreamed of coming to the United States. One day, he receives a job offer, and he gets that opportunity. I asked Pawan to walk me through his experience. And what he told me was that he began by researching his new home. And what he found was that there were articles about the history of the space program. There were stories about tourist attractions and beaches. But what was missing were the actual stories of the people who lived in that community, their hopes, their dreams, their aspirations as a community. And really, for Pawan, what was missing was how he fit into his new home. Pawan began his journey with a flight halfway across the world. And when he arrives in Orlando International Airport, he walks off the jetway, and it hits him. He's alone. He's just another face in the crowd. He makes his way through the busy building and gets to a cab to begin the trip to the hotel. And Pawan told me that in that moment, his anxiety was at an all-time high. Who was he going to meet? What would the community be like? How would he contribute? Would he fit in? He arrives at his hotel room, puts down his bag, and begins to watch TV. I can only imagine that this was a hard night for Pawan. Pawan eventually starts his new job. He meets new people, and everything's pretty good. But he doesn't feel like he belongs to this community. He doesn't feel any sense of home. Pawan begins to explore other places in the country that he might be a better fit. And just by chance, during the same time, he finds a startup incubator called Groundswell. And in Groundswell, he finds a community of people dedicated to growing new businesses. They're interested in finding innovative ways to work and new solutions to problems. Pawan finds a home, and he attributes this home with a sense of belonging and retaining him within the community. Which brings me to the second point I learned during my Easter egg jacket moment: shared vision. When people believe they can contribute. And so I began to ask Pawan what a vision of the future would look like, how that experience could be different for other people coming to the Space Coast. And in just a couple of hours, Pawan and I co-created a vision of what could be. We began to ask questions like, what if? What if, when Pawan had started to research his new home, instead of just seeing the beaches and tourist attractions, he saw stories, unmoderated, of the challenges and the triumphs of the people who live in his community? What if Pawan could start to picture what it would be like to live in that community and how he might contribute to it? What if, when Pawan had arrived at the airport, there was a sign that said, "The Space Coast welcomes all innovators," and showed a powerful picture of disruptors of the past and innovators of the present? What if, when Pawan had gotten into the cab, he had seen a display that said, "The Space Coast is the 5th largest tech center in the United States, and we invite you to become part of our innovative future"? What if, when Pawan had gotten to his hotel room, he had had a personalized invitation from his new employer to participate in community activities, not just work-related, but art and sports and culture and innovation? I believe that Pawan would have been able to plug into the community much sooner. begin to contribute much sooner. Which brings me to the last point that I learned during my Easter egg jacket moment. Context, an understanding of what people's real needs are, plus a shared vision, co-created by many different groups, creates a culture. And those cultures are able to adapt and change and react to the world around us at much greater speed than any one group or one person can. So what does this all mean? It's simple. Things are great. My Nehru jacket was incredible. But things are just containers for our culture. Once we have context and a shared vision, we can fill our containers with cultures that can change, adapt, and continue to meet the needs of our communities in better and better ways. So as designers of our community, I hope we will all ask questions, co-create shared visions of the future with diverse groups, and begin to build containers that hold our culture and better meet the needs of our community. Thank you.